Well, it's the first time we speak, Omar, so pleasure to have you.
Same here.
And yeah, I like when I speak to a guest for the first time, I kind of would love to get kind of a broad question on your analysis, not of the war, because that ship has sailed a long time ago, like a week, I don't know what, from the start of this war. More importantly, on the state of affairs now. There's a lot, whether it's about Trump's visit to China, Trump's options when it comes to Iran, Iran's plans in a post-US world order in the regional order, and a post-US Gulf regional order as well, and what Saudi is talking about a non-aggression pact, and all the information there's just so much that is happening about Saudi and the UAE attacking Iran. We got those reports. We've also got the reports now. Obviously, UAE left OPEC, and the UAE was the country leading, according to reports. I'm not sure if it's confirmed, and leading the charge for a Gulf coalition to respond militarily against Iran, which other Gulf countries refused. So there's a lot there, and I'd love to get your general analysis of the state of affairs now.
Sure. Happy to do that. Are we live at the moment?
We're already live, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So happy to hit that. Look, I think you can't talk about the current situation without kind of like zooming back a little bit and looking at what led us to this moment. And what led us to this moment is a fundamentally broken relationship between the United States and Israel that has lasted for, frankly, decades. It's been clear that the situation is unsustainable. You have Israel that is being treated by the United States as a country that is above the rules and above the law. Their occupation is allowed to continue with minimal criticism, supplied endless military funding to commit all sorts of atrocities without accountability. The idea that the United States was presenting itself to the region as this force for democracy and human rights while allowing Israel to behave the way it was doing presented a contradiction that should have been obvious to everyone. And on top of that, the Palestinian situation is untenable because for much of the Arab world, Palestine is the lens through which they look at international relations more generally. And so an America that is trying to build sustainable interests throughout the region, allowing Palestinians to be treated the way that they were being treated for this long, was always going to present some level of instability and distrust of the United States. And many of us have been warning for many, many years about the fact that this is not sustainable, that an explosion is coming, that anybody who cares about regional peace and stability would be pressuring the United States to fundamentally change this relationship and start behaving towards Israel in a very different way, to say that Israel has to be just another country in the region, behaving within the bounds of international law and having to respect human rights instead of treating them like they're above the rules and expecting that's not going to create any kind of backlash. And so we are in the midst of this backlash right now. We are in a situation of disequilibrium in the region. Obviously, it started that particular episode with the explosion out of Gaza on October 7th, the ensuing Israeli genocide in Gaza, and then Israel just basically trying to test the limit. I think when the Israelis look at American public opinion, they see that American public opinion is shifting against Israel's favor, skyrocketing. Disfavorable views of Israel are to be perceived everywhere they look throughout the United States polling. And I think that they're looking at this moment as possibly the last moment they have where there's unquestionable American support, and they want to do the maximum they could possibly do with it. And the maximum is getting rid of as many Palestinians as possible, the campaign of ethnic cleansing that's being carried on in Gaza and the West Bank, and trying to essentially turn Lebanon into a pliant regional state that basically bows down to Israel and behaves however Israel wants, and taking on their ultimate rival in the region, Iran, which frankly is the most powerful regional actor that is undermining the project of Israeli dominance in the region. And we are in the deepest point of that conflict right now. It's very difficult to predict where we're going to go from here because we've never been in this situation before. This is unprecedented, and we are at the pinnacle of a power struggle that is going to determine the face of the region for many, many decades to come.
Ironically, the timing of this is interesting. So, you probably just saw before we went live, there was a pretty big strike in Gaza, in where is it? In Ramal, I think it's called. Mm-hmm. Announced they were in targeting.
You're seeing it before.
Okay,
I've not actually looked at the
news. Okay, so that just came in now, but I'll tell you what it happened. Who the target was. It's an assassination attempt against Izz al-Din al-Haddad, the commander of the Al-Qassam brigades, the leader of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Do you know who that is, the specific individual?
I do, but I just, again, I want to backtrack here on a minute. We can't call anything that's happening in Gaza a ceasefire. That itself is a misnomer and it's a lie. And anybody who tells you that there's a ceasefire in Gaza is simply just lying to you. All that happened in Gaza is that the rate of the genocide has been basically pushed to a slower pace. That Trump chasing this dream of a peace prize basically put pressure on Israel. He wanted to take credit for having stopped the fighting in Gaza. And what he basically told the Israelis is, stop killing over 100 people every day, bring it down. Nothing in the Israeli project has to change. The project of dividing Gaza, of squeezing Palestinians into smaller and smaller areas of Gaza, expanding the ethnic cleansing and continuing the war on Palestinian existence, including the war on Hamas, none of that has stopped. And so this is simply a continuation of it. And there's nothing surprising about it, about the fact that Israel is still, again, having this moment of complete and total impunity. They're not going to stop fighting in Gaza. They're not going to stop obliterating Palestinian existence.
What's going to happen, Omar? What is so absurd? Interrupt you. This is insane that people have moved on from Gaza, and the status quo in Gaza is just crazy to see. You work in Washington. You've been following. You understand this better than most people that I've spoken to. Realistically speaking, what's going to be the outcome of Gaza?
It, I think, will depend at the rate at which Israel. I mean, look, if in a world in which nobody stops Israel for many, many years to come, I think the future of Gaza is a deeply dystopian one. It's incredibly depressing. I don't know if there's any way to get a count of the population. I think most experts on the topic tell you that the death toll is substantially higher than what is being officially reported. What is officially reported, the figure of 70-something thousand, is based on people they can find in areas they can access. But when you actually cumulatively talk about the people who are buried under the rubble and never found, and you add to that the people who are in inaccessible areas, the areas that Israel has closed off that nobody else can actually get into, we don't know how many people have been killed in those areas. And on top of that, you've got the fact that you have a complete collapse of the health system in Gaza. The people who would have died of so-called natural causes simply for lack of access to medical help, those are not counted in the death toll. But cumulatively, we are looking at a Gaza that cannot sustain human life. The problem, the UN was saying that Gaza could not sustain human life even before the genocide began in 2023. They were saying that we were reaching a point where the water is undrinkable, the siege is suffocating, no economic activity. And then you add what has happened since, and Gaza simply cannot sustain human life. And in a world in which we accept the current status quo, just day after day, month after month, and year after year, there is no Gaza left. And to speak of Gaza, I mean, it becomes a site of a historical atrocity. Now, in the short term, is Israel going to be able to literally get rid of every last Palestinian in Gaza? I don't think they can do that within the Trump years, unless Trump gives them the green light to go back to the scale of the violence that they were engaged in 2020.
Even at that scale, they can't just get rid of every. There's what's the population of Gaza now, approximately?
Yeah, it's very difficult to know. It started with 2.3 million people at the beginning of all this, and it is very, very difficult to get a sense of what the current estimates are. But if you look,
it's well over 2 million. Well over 2 million. So what I'm saying is that it's not justifying anything. I'm saying there is no scenario where they will get, unless when you mean by get rid, you mean like expel them out of the territory as well. But no one is accepting them for multiple reasons. So there is no scenario for Gaza, for Palestinians to no longer be in Gaza. For that to happen, Israel needs to have a multi-year, maybe even multi-decade plan, which is horrendous. We're even talking about this, but that's the reality we live in. But my position is that plan is probably now least feasible than it's been in a long time, than it's ever been, actually, because of what happened in Iran. The war in Iran has led to such a massive shift in power, assuming it has ended and this is a new status quo, that Iran is now a new pole in that multipolar regional world, along with the Gulf and Israel, and one that is very supportive of the Palestinian cause, opposed to Israeli foreign policy and expansionism. So in that world, in that post-Iran war world, is it fair to say that Israel would not have the same impunity it's had before? Add to it as well the shifting sentiment in the US, and it's fair to say that maybe maybe we could finally see a solution to the Palestinian cause in the next decade, and a cease of hostilities in Lebanon, and a change of foreign policy and maybe even administration in Israel?
So I agree largely with what you're saying. It is just difficult for me to conclude that we are on the verge of seeing whatever possible solution you might describe, simply because I don't think either party has come to terms with the fact that this is a new reality that they have to adjust. They are in the midst of the battle, and from Israel's perspective, they will not accept a Lebanon in which Hezbollah survives. They will not accept, any semblance of Palestinian resistance within the Palestinian territories. They want to make it just a fait accompli that there is no such thing as Palestine by the time they're done. And it is, the one that's hardest is they also don't want to accept a new regional order in which Iran is even more powerful than it was in the past. So they're in the midst of fighting tooth and nail to make sure that none of these things materialize. And the ticket from their perspective is to get Trump to go all in on renewing the war with Iran. So I think Trump does not want a renewal of hostilities. He's already tried it. The cost has been absolutely devastating economically for the United States. Iran's ability to continue to project power, obviously, and I also want to be clear here, nobody can win a war in the United States. Nobody ever has won a war against the United States, because the US can always kill more people on the other side, can always destroy more things. Like, if you look at the rate of destruction, there's no question that Iran has suffered just many orders of magnitude greater than anything the US has suffered. But what countries that resist America's regional designs can do is just present an untenable situation where they simply don't, if they don't cave in to what the US wants, they create a cost over the long term that forces the US to recalculate. And this is what Iran is doing right now, is that Trump keeps bragging about, killed this many leaders and destroyed the Iranian Navy and the Air Force. None of that means anything. All of these things are expected. It would be surprising if the US could not accomplish all the things that they've actually accomplished. The question is, can you change Iranian attitude at the end of all this to get them to basically bow to American power and to accommodate whatever Trump wants? We're a million miles away from that. The reality could not be more different. And the reason, Mario, I think here is Trump was fooled by the Israelis about how easy this was going to be. He was presented with the Venezuelan sort of example, where it makes sense if you're, you watch the Venezuelan president kidnapped by the US, thrown in prison, you come to the next person and say, either do what we want or you end up in the same situation. Most people will say, okay, that's fine. I'm going to do what you want. I don't want to end up that way. And there's just a deep misunderstanding of Iran's ideology and theology, and their entire attitude is that they don't operate from the perspective of material self-interest right here, right now. They operate from a different perspective, which is one where the entire culture of defiance and the willingness to make immense sacrifices for the sake of being defiant towards the US. Israel knows this. Trump did not understand this. And I think by Israel presenting Trump with the possibility that this was going to be a cakewalk and Trump buying it, what Israel guaranteed is that now Trump is stuck in a no-win situation. And so what do you bank on the US doing right now? Are they going to agree to a deal that is favorable to Iran, that everybody's going to understand is a defeat for Trump? Does Trump have the personality where his ego can suffer a defeat like that? But then the other side of it is Trump capable of doubling down and continuing when the prospects are going to lead to far greater economic devastation? Trump is stuck between a rock and a hard place. And that means that none of us know what Trump is going to do next. He's incredibly unpredictable. And Israel is still banking and pushing in favor of Trump renewing this war and doubling down, trying to scare him with the prospect of defeat and saying victory is just an inch away, and if only you push a little bit more. So that uncertainty is the only reason why I would not have the same level of confidence that you do, that we're just a few years away from a completely different reality in which, the Palestinian issue can be settled and so on. We're still in the midst of that conflict, and we don't know which way it's going to go and what it's going to look like and how much more catastrophic it could be if Israel can push Trump to renew that war in a much more aggressive way.
What is the more likely scenario in your view? He walks away and accepts defeat and paints it into a win, or he gets stuck into the escalation trap?
Yeah, I think his preference is to walk away and get some image of victory. I just don't think that there is that political space for him right now. Nobody buys it. His political opponents within the United States are not going to allow him that win. He's going to be skewered across the media for essentially going in and ending up in a reality. You know, you have to remember, Mario, all of this problem with Iran was solved under the Obama deal, the nuclear question. It was already settled. Iran could not develop nuclear weapons verifiably under inspections. And in return, Iran was free of sanctions and able to behave politically in the region the way it wanted to. Only the nuclear weapons question was completely off the table. Trump said that was not good enough. But what deal is Trump going to get that is going to be better than the Obama deal? It doesn't look like that's an option right now. So as desperate as he is to paint an image of victory out of something, and it's the reason Trump is lashing out right now and saying media who say that we're losing the war, you know, accusing them of treason and threatening charges of treason, that tells you that this is a man who does not know what to do at this point. So even though Trump's inclination is towards manufacturing,
that's a man wanting to declare this a win and wants the media to play ball so he could walk away. Because there's a Harvard poll I've mentioned many times on the show that 3/4 of Americans, 74%, believe the US is currently winning the war. That was a poll last month. They believe the US was winning the war. A poll in 3 weeks ago. So based on that, most people don't know what me, you, and most people that watch the show and what you know is that this is a massive strategic loss for the US. They see it as a win. The war is unpopular, but they see it as the US won. And they would be happy moving on and kind of forgetting about it. Because remember, it's not, even though it was extremely costly from a munitions perspective and a dollar perspective, and obviously from a damage perspective for Iran and the region and the world economy, it's also a very short war that people can easily forget. Americans have not been impacted that much other than gas prices, which would go eventually back down. So there is the argument that, no, Trump has the leeway to walk away, which I still think is the more likely scenario, unless there's influences we don't know about, the same influences that got him into this very odd, bizarre, terrible war that made no sense for anyone watching it from the outside, somehow got him into it. The same influences could drag him back into it.
Yeah, you can imagine, Mario, like for deep strategic interest in the US, there's many people who would be opposed to this war because they know the risks that Trump would be taking on. But from their perspective, having been here, right, they oppose this entire move. But now we're stuck in a situation where the most likely outcome is an infinitely more powerful Iran that projects regional dominance in a way that is unprecedented. They might be inclined to say, we need to see this through. As costly as it is, just go all in. You know, they don't want a repeat of Iraq, but if the difference is either an Iran-dominated region or a repeat of Iraq, where the U.S. spends endless blood and treasure, some people might be inclined towards the latter, and that's what I worry about. Is that obviously it makes no sense from any kind of like moral, principled perspective in terms of what's good for regional peace, in terms of what's good in the long term for anyone. I'm deeply opposed to this war and think it should end as soon as possible. But I can see how some strategic centers of power in Washington might be viewing this a little bit differently and terrified of the prospect of allowing Iran to be more powerful.
When you got the face of the neocon movement, Robert Kagan, talking about the war, best option for Trump is to walk away. Now, that's someone that despises Trump anyway, so take that with a grain of salt. But for someone like him to say, hey, this is the least bad option, it's a terrible option, but the others are worse. Maybe others around Trump, I'm talking about voices that focus on American interests and not foreign countries' interests, not Israeli interests. They know that, yes, this is a terrible outcome, but getting back into the war will not change the outcome. That's the escalation trap. It won't change the outcome. Now, the reason I have my doubts is those same damn voices would have known in the first place that the war itself would lead to negative outcomes. So my concern is that if these people didn't know from the beginning that this war will have catastrophic outcomes, why am I so hopeful this time around? They know that the continuation of the war will lead to catastrophic outcomes. Then you've got the Gulf countries, which are split, but I think most of them agree the war should not continue. That's my stance. And we do know that the Saudis coming up with some sort of a non-aggression pact in the region, similar to Eastern Europe decades ago. So there is an argument to be made that the Gulf don't want this war. But then again, the counter argument, which is why I'm so unsure, you're going to give me both sides. The counter argument is that those same Gulf countries couldn't stop the war in the first place. So it's really hard to know, man. Really hard to know.
No, I agree. And, you know, part of the problem here is that look who Trump surrounded himself with. He surrounded himself by idiots, yes men. You know, what does Pete Hegseth know about, you know, world politics and power dynamics? Nothing. So the problem is when these are the people in the room, when Trump is so unserious about governing, that for him, the entire thing is just a domestic political show. And you surround yourself by idiots who don't know what they're doing. You're not going to always get the best advice on the best path to proceed. And that is why we are in this situation. And as far as the Gulf region, I think that's the misunderstanding that you see from a lot of people of, well, the Gulf does not like Iran, therefore the Gulf supports this war. And like, it could not be farther from the truth. Few countries in the Gulf are on board with this war. Most are not. And they're not primarily because of their self-interest, because they see the possibility that there's going to be mass devastation in their own countries as a result of this. You know, an exchange with Iran, and so far, by the way, the exchange has been restrained to some extent. We've not seen all that. We've not seen, you know,
it's been restrained on both sides, to be honest.
Yeah.
And that's because both sides didn't want, especially the US side. The reason Iran was restrained, in my view, is to make sure the US, one of the reasons is to make sure the US does not cross certain red lines, which is striking the energy infrastructure, among others. And in return, they didn't want to have permanent damage to their relations with the Gulf. So they were balancing it in a way, and many people may not understand this, but they were balancing it in a way so they can mend those relationships again. And you heard Arachi a couple of days ago. He said, look, I didn't want to talk about this publicly, but I think he was responding to something the Emiratis said. He's like, didn't want to talk about this publicly, but it was the Emiratis that were trying to lead a coalition of the Gulf to attack Iran militarily. So but he said, I didn't want to really bring it up because I don't want to ruin the possibility of mending those relations. But I think the pragmatism will prevail, and I think Gulf countries will come together, and they'll understand that they need to. I think this war has proven that they cannot trust Israel. Look at Israel leaking that Netanyahu went to
the UAE.
Yeah, you can play the video, by the way, Lisa, in Gaza. Let's just show quickly the strike that happened. You can play the various videos that are shown there, Lisa. But that was a strike on Gaza City. The leader, one of the commanders, the commander of the IRGC, the commander of the Al-Qassam Brigade, which is the military wing of Hamas. So this is the outcome of the strike. This is where the building that was struck. It was a drone strike. There's more footage of it as well, Lisa. You can play others while we're speaking. But I'd let you comment on that point. How will the region look like? Let's talk about a post-Iran war region when the US bases and presence will start to reduce.
Yeah, some relationships can be restored, I think, to some extent, and some won't. And I agree with you on the point about restraint. Everybody was, to some extent, restrained because they want to say we're capable of causing damage, but they want to stop short of causing maximum damage because they want a possibility for backtracking from here. They don't want this to be a war to the end because we know what that would look like. And that is just utter and complete and total devastation throughout the entire region. And it would not, it is obviously against everybody's interest. That's the entire basis of MAD, mutually assured destruction, is that you create a certain level of mutual power that's supposed to guarantee peace on the basis that both sides would lose catastrophically if this were to go all the way to the end. And I think this is a little bit of what we saw here. Everybody understands the US and Israel are capable of that. Nobody has any illusions about the firepower that they can pack and how long they can go for. And what Iran was demonstrating is that no matter what you do to Iran, they've built the infrastructure to maintain that violence to the end and can cause it whenever they want to, wherever they want to throughout the entire region, in order to create a dynamic in which everybody sees that it's in their best interest to come to a deal. It still goes back to what the terms of that deal are going to be. I can absolutely see relations between Iran and Oman and Qatar and Saudi Arabia and frankly most of the Gulf repaired. I think of the UAE and Bahrain a little bit differently. I think these are the two most hawkishly anti-Iranian states in the region, and therefore I think that it is going to be
little tiny Bahrain is hawkish. It's like a little chihuahua.
Yeah, certainly not project power in any meaningful sense, but nonetheless, their attitude has been probably the UAE first and foremost, followed by Bahrain, where it's difficult to imagine there's going to be, nice relations between them and Iran, but you can get to a ceasefire ultimately, sort of the ceasefire that held between Israel and Lebanon from 2006 all the way to 2023. You can end up with that situation where the countries are not pretending to be friends, but you have a dynamic in which nobody wants to bother anybody because nobody wants to deal with the consequences of that. So I think for part of the Gulf, it would be approaching that kind of normalizing of complete relations with Iran, where they can be part of a new regional order. And for others, it's going to still be kind of belonging on the opposite team in a way, but nonetheless not reaching to the level of hostility, which is all we can ask for. Now, the influence of that on Palestine is what remains unknown, because Iran was willing to draw certain lines demanding a ceasefire in Lebanon as a precondition for a ceasefire in Iran. So they have a deeper investment in Lebanon and Hezbollah survival in a political structure in Lebanon that still maintains Iranian interests in a way that they're not willing to draw that line with Gaza or with Palestine in general. Now, I'm not saying their general posture is not pro-Palestinian or anti-Israeli. Those things are true, but is that going to be a make or break line for Iran before making any agreements? I don't think so. So I think the scenario out of this potentially is Iran being able to get Trump to compel Israel to knock it off in Lebanon, to actually fully withdraw, and to just accept that they're not going to loop Lebanon into their sphere of influence. That is one possibility in which you can have things settle. But the Palestinian situation is the one that continues to be the most dire, because they are in a defenseless population that don't have sufficient backing of any regional power. Now, interestingly, they have the backing of the entire world in terms of public opinion. Any decent human being looking at the situation understands the incredible injustice that has been imposed on Palestinians, knows that they have been denied their rights in a way that is completely unacceptable and is demanding it. So you've got that soft power pressure building, where in European countries, in the United States, and throughout the entire world, where in order for Israel to be normalized once again in the international community, they're going to have to deal with the Palestinian issue. But that is different from the short term in terms of military and strategic power in the region. I think Israel is an opportunity.
One can make the argument. So I've been making the argument, the meeting between Xi and Trump is a symbol. It's not the beginning, but it's a symbol of what's already started, the process of the world shifting into a multipolar world. And the Iran war has sped up that process. Okay, and one can make the similar argument to Israel and Palestine. Gaza, October 7th, was exactly the same when it comes to Israel, because Israel's response, which, by the way, in a speech, what's the leader of Hamas called? Not Ismail that was killed in Iran, the one that was killed in Gaza. The leader.
Sorry, the leader who was killed
of Hamas.
Yeah, it's hilarious that I'm blanking on it right now. What is it?
Let me check it. Hamas leader, not Ismail Haniyeh, the other guy.
The October 7th architect.
The leader.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm so keen to find out his name.
Right now.
Yeah. So, no, this is not him. I'll find him later. Yeah. So he said it in a speech that he expected a scorched earth response from Israel. Okay, and that's what happened.
What he wants the entire region to be on fire. Yahya Sinwar.
Yeah. Yahya Sinwar, yeah. And he did talk, you know which speech I'm referring to, where he said the whole region will be on fire. Do you know what? Yeah. So he mentioned it, he kind of predicted that to happen, and it unfolded. Now, what that led to is a massive global shift. So kind of they saw Israeli strategy bear exposed in front of the entire world, and that led to a massive shift in global sentiment around Israel that would begin the process of getting political leaders where public opinion is no longer impacted by how much money they raise from lobbyists and donors. And therefore, we're already seeing that, with obviously Mamdani being one of many examples. And a lot of Democratic members of Congress are starting to shift their tone on Israel. So the process has started, and October 7th could be the beginning of a long process that leads to a shift of strategy on Israel that is forced upon them, that will then force a new administration, that will then stop indoctrinating their nation into that endless, perpetual state of fear, where they're always in defensive mode. And being in defensive mode means being an aggressor in the region and a destabilizer. So that could be the beginning of the beginning of a solution for the Palestinian cause as well.
It could be. And I just want to note something. When Sinwar was talking about this being the strategy, it's incredible how much of it counted on the foolishness and the hubris of the Israeli response. That it did not have to be that way. Israel had immense sympathy on the back of October 7th. And if they did not behave in the unhinged way that they did, this was not inevitable. And yet Sinwar understood the Israelis well enough that he knew that Israel was going to try to capitalize on this in the most vicious way possible. And when they go as far as genocide and invading Lebanon and bombing Iran, predicting that, I mean, honestly, it's incredible in some way to know that Israel is going to react to that extreme at a time when other parties in the region, that's not what they were shooting for. Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, his prediction was not that at all. his prediction was that there's going to eventually be a ceasefire after Israel is allowed to, take revenge essentially on Gaza, maybe kill 10 or 20,000 people, that there's going to be a stop to this. And Hezbollah's strategy at the time was minimal involvement, symbolic involvement almost, to say that we're in solidarity in Gaza, but trying desperately to stop this from spilling into an all-out war in Lebanon. And their prediction was wrong. Turns out that the depth of Israeli penetration into Hezbollah in Lebanon was significant, and that Israel did see this as an opportunity. Instead of saying it would be a lose-lose for everyone, they thought maybe we can knock them out with the pager attacks and taking out the leadership and so on. That could be meaningful. And they just went for it. And the Iranian response to that and everything that has exploded since. So again, everybody in the region was trying to prevent Sinwar's prediction from coming true, and Israel insisted on it, and that is precisely why we are where we are. And it tells you something about I think that what we have, because the United States allowed Israel to behave with impunity for so long, you have a distortion in Israel's perceptions of its own interests in a way. That when you look at how Israeli society reacts to the rape of Palestinian prisoners, when there was an attempt for accountability for Israeli jailers who engaged in this kind of sexual violence, there were riots in Israel. And a member of the Israeli Knesset basically defended the act. He was asked, would you support doing this to Palestinians? He said, yes, that's perfectly defensible. When you have a society that's used to impunity, they start speaking in a way that is deeply alienating to the rest of the world. And that is part of the reason why this shift is now getting out of Israel's control. The Israeli lobby in the United States used to be extremely invested in public relations, in presenting Israel as the only democracy in the Middle East and the source of what. There's just a way that they talk about Israel that is supposed to be like, what wonderful values we share in common, and that's the reason to support them. And at this point, they've lost complete control of the narrative because everybody can see through that bullshit at this point. It's just nothing is left of it anymore. And
they bit off more than they could chew.
Absolutely. And what they're left with right now, and sort of the fight within the United States right now, what the Israel lobby is left with is attempts to silence free expression. It's smearing people with false charges of anti-Semitism. The entire discussion is no longer about presenting Israel as morally superior in any way. It's all based on trying to shut down the discussion, because the more discussion that you have about what Israel is doing, the more obvious it becomes to the American public that we cannot continue supporting this genocidal regime in the region that is behaving in a way that is extremely racist and completely out of control and counter to American interests. And that's why we're beginning to see this major shift in American politics as well.
Agree. All right, Omar, it's a pleasure to meet you, man. I appreciate you coming on the show, and I enjoyed our conversation. I'm sure I'll have you again.
Thank you so much, Mario. Always good to be with you. All right.
Thanks, my friend.
See you.
All right, guys. Meet Omar, first time on the show. Great, passionate speaker, and kind of focusing on more than just the Iran war and the repercussions of the war for the entire region. And I'm glad he really focused heavily on the Palestinian cause, because that tends to be forgotten. And we fall prey to this as well, along with the general public. No one's talking. A lot less people are talking about the Palestinian cause, and we're talking a lot less about it, even though it's what triggered all this. It's what triggered kind of all the dominoes that fell that led us to this war that we're going through now in Iran. So I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Let me know what you think in the comments if you'd like to see Omar again on the show, and I'll go through them a bit later. In 15 minutes, 13 minutes, we got Dr. Malone again to talk about hantavirus. I'll be covering that again because there's been more updates on it. All right, cool. I'm just reading an update on the hantavirus now. All right, guys. Thank you so much.